Do indeed.
Excellent. So there's a little warning there saying if you don't like to be recorded, please leave, but hopefully nobody has. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to our first event of this year's Eye on Streatham calendar, which is the photographic section of the Streatham Festival. We'll be running the Streatham Festival from the 8th of October to the 17th. So look out for more Eye on Streatham events, which will be running in parallel, but basically from now until the end of the Streatham Festival. And please feel free to go to www.streathamfestival.com/Eye on Streatham to keep up to date with all the events and all the fun stuff we've got. So I'll be just about to hand over to Jeremy for our first exciting event of 2021, Shooting for the Stars. I'd like to have put a big thank you to those of us or those who registered early and donated their ticket fees to the Streatham and the Norbury and Brixton Food Bank. And if you would like to donate, I'll just put a link in the chat as well. So this is not compulsory or anything like that. It's just like I say, it's the way we like to run the events, make sure that everybody who has an opportunity can contribute. But it could be food or it could be monetary donations, whatever you feel comfortable with. That would be great. And basically I'll hand over to Jeremy. And first things first, like I say, Jeremy's put together a really amazing presentation. I've run through it already. There's some great content there. If you wouldn't mind staying on mute, Anne-Marie will mute everybody. But if anybody has to, gets kicked out of Zoom and rejoins, if you wouldn't mind popping yourself back on mute, and we'll leave questions to the end. And like I say, if you've got anything that you can't remember, a bit like myself, please feel free to put the question in the chat, and we'll pass those questions over to Jeremy during the Q&A session. But I'll shut up now and hand over to the star, no pun intended, of today's event, Jeremy.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to share screen here. So I hope you can see the screen okay. Does that work all right?
Yep, we can see.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Streatham people, for asking me to do this. And thank you to everyone here for joining this astrophotography workshop. So I live in Streatham, well, Streatham Hill, actually, with my wife and 2 daughters. It's pretty much one of the worst places you could be as an astrophotographer in terms of light pollution, really. But I got interested in astronomy when I was 11. Because I passed an exam, and as a reward, my father bought me a second-hand 3-inch refractor telescope for passing my exam. And I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was itself actually at the time, and pointed the telescope at the brightest objects I could see in the sky, and couldn't believe what I saw because it actually had rings. And of course it was Saturn, and this blew me away. And I then pointed the telescope at another bright object nearby, and that turned out to be Jupiter. And I could see its 4 moons and a giant storm cloud on it. So I was kind of double blown away and totally hooked by them. But back then, even the best images taken from the Earth couldn't compare with what amateur astrophotographers are able to capture today with basic backyard equipment, thanks to really digital technology. So I'm just going to move this frame on. So here's some of my images, and all the images that I'm going to show you are my own unless otherwise credited. And during this session, I'm going to take you on 2 journeys, if you like. One of them's physical, because we're going to start with our near neighbor, the moon. And then we're going to journey into the depths of our own Milky Way galaxy to nebulas, which are huge, beautiful clouds of interstellar gas. And then we're going to travel beyond our own galaxy, even deeper into space, where I'll show you how you can take images of other galaxies, even though these are, well, truly unfathomable distances from the Earth. But there's a second journey, because in terms of skill levels, we'll start with things you can do pretty much from the get-go with little or no experience. But as we travel further away from the Earth, the techniques become a little bit more fiddly and challenging. But I want to demystify those, because really with a bit of determination, you can be taking those more advanced pictures within a few months. And I'm not technologically minded. If I can do it in a few months, then I think pretty much anyone can, really. By occupation, I'm a producer, making documentaries and factual programs for the Discovery television network, where I deal with the sort of journalism and content and leave the technical stuff to the technicians. It's not my area. And I'm certainly no genius with software and tech. Just to say, of course, you can't pack everything into an hour. There's lots I can't say here. And I know there's a range of knowledge among those of you who are here, but I'll try to include something for everybody. And I'll show you some astrophotography techniques that capture these objects. And I should say, they aren't the only techniques that you can use. But when it comes to nebulas and galaxies in particular, the methods I'm going to show you are the ones that I think are getting the best results for amateur astrophotographers. So here we are in our South London backyard. And this is daughters, who here is pretty much the same age as I was when those rings of Saturn blew me away. And we're looking through a very cheap, 80 pounds tiny telescope here at the moon. And Zoe looked through the telescope and said, wow. And I looked through the telescope and said, wow. And the moon, it's such a beautiful object with all its definition and craters that show up very clearly, even on basic equipment like this. And like most people, the moon tends to be their kind of gateway drug, if you like, into astrophotography. Anyway, I had this iPhone, which has no control over the exposure or gain or any of the settings. It just takes the picture it wants to take. And I held it over the eyepiece of the telescope. And okay, this isn't the greatest picture of the moon that's ever been taken. But this is what we took with the iPhone. We said, wow. And when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was grab my iPhone and look at this picture. And I thought, wow, it's amazing. You can take these pictures with the most basic of equipment. We then sort of progressed to this clamp, which you can hold your iPhone over a telescope like this. And so if you wanted to use this setup, you know, the most expensive piece of equipment is probably something you already have in your back pocket, which is your mobile phone. And here it is lined up on the lichens on our neighbour's roof. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend pointing a telescope at your neighbour's house during the day. And if they call around the front door to complain, it's a bit difficult explaining it away that you're doing astrophotography. So this is the slightly dodgy image that we got from pointing using the clamp over the telescope. But if you play around a little bit with the definition and the contrast, you can really enhance it. You could even break every rule in the astrophotography rule book and put it over a star field like this and turn it a different way around. I'm not really a big fan of changing images and putting things in that weren't actually there, but I've included this here because to make the point that there aren't really any rules, and you make up your own rules, and the only point really is to have fun with this. So if you want to put a star field in, put a star field in. And if you want to turn the moon round the other way, well, there's no up or down in space, so you decide. Looking on Instagram, here's somebody that I corresponded with, who's doing a lot more than I ever did with an iPhone. Her iPhone is a Samsung Note 20 Ultra, which you can use to control the gain and the exposure length. So again, if you have a phone that has more control over it, you can take pictures of things like this, which is the Milky Way. It's one of the spiral arms of our galaxy, and it's beautiful. And so she took the picture on the left there of the Milky Way, and she used an app on her mobile phone to enhance it, an app called Snapseed and also Lightroom. And it's amazing what she posts actually online. And I just thought I'd include this to show you again, with basic equipment, without even buying a camera or a telescope, you can achieve something like this. Here's another one she took, which looks like it's over an observatory. So that's Narinda Langcake, who's based in Melbourne, Australia. She also took this one with an intervalometer, which is an app that takes a picture every few seconds. In fact, she took 800 pictures over 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours. And then this app called Light Trails will join all the dots of the stars together that she's taken the pictures of and show you how the stars appear to rotate around the sky, around the pole star. And it's actually the Earth that's rotating, but it creates rather a spectacular image here. So again, just with an iPhone. If you're already taking pictures and you're into photography, you might already have one of these cameras, a DSLR camera or a full frame mirrorless camera. There are different versions of this kind of camera. And with these, you can really lift things and do all kinds of things that you can't do, obviously, with a mobile phone. If you buy a zoom lens for it, that's great for the moon. And I would suggest that if you have at least a 300mm lens, you can really start getting some good shots of the moon. We picked up this 600mm lens, which is, has a bit more power to it. And with this, you can really get in there on a lot more detail on the moon, as you can see here. And even if you crop in, it seems to stand up to the close scrutiny, and you can pick out the craters and all the kind of scars and knocks that it's taken over its billions of years of existence. And the great thing about the moon, well, I mentioned I lived in Streatham Hill, which is a light polluted area. There's a scale for light pollution, which runs from 1, Bortle 1, which is very, very clear, unlight polluted, all the way to Bortle 9, which is very light polluted. Streatham is sort of 8 or 9. But if you're taking pictures of the moon, it's a great way to start because it's such a bright object. It's the second brightest object in the heavens after the sun, and it's very forgiving. Doesn't matter if there are street lights and car lights and neighbors' lights going on and off, you can still snap it quite effectively. So it's a great way into astrophotography, and you can have fun with it and learn the basics. So, take different pictures of it through its phases. Every 27 and a bit days, it goes through a full phase of waxing and waning. And how do you like it? Do you prefer it as the thin fingernail image or the full moon? I kind of like the one second from the top right there, which is because it's side lit by the sun, and that picks out all the craters and the relief on its surface. Picture it ducking behind the clouds even. So here's one of it partly obscured by cloud cover, again with that 600mm lens. And even during the daytime, it's such a bright object, you can take quite effective pictures of it where you see the relief and the craters on the surface. And here it is dodging behind the daytime clouds. And these are pretty rubbish pictures, but I've put them in again. These were taken with my slightly rubbish iPhone, but I've put them in, they're not great pictures. They won't win any awards anywhere. But I've put them in just to show you that, have fun with this. And really, you're just doing it for fun and for yourself. And if you want to take a picture through the tree whilst walking on two, go for it. Or here's our astro cat, Casper. I like to think he's contemplating the moon, but that might be a bit hopeful. So with these DSLR cameras or full frame mirrorless cameras, as I mentioned, you have these interchangeable lenses. There's a great secondhand market for these. They're not particularly expensive. This one, and I think if you go for 35mm or less, which is a wide angle lens, it opens up a whole new world, which is taking pictures of the Milky Way. And we saw Ninda did a bit of that with her iPhone earlier on. So here's the Milky Way. You can't do it from a light polluted area. And I'm fortunate enough to have met an extremely wonderful professor of astrophysics who allows me to use his garden down in East Sussex. And that little R2-D2 object, bottom left, is his LiDAR system, which fires out lasers and monitors the atmosphere. And so there's our streak across the sky, which is the spiral arm of the galaxy. And to take these pictures, you have to do a long exposure, quite a few seconds. And you saw those star streaks earlier, as the stars the Earth rotates and the stars move across your field of view. Well, in a 30-second exposure is a kind of close-up of what the stars start doing. Because the Earth is rotating, the stars create little streaks across the field of view. And that's the enemy of astrophotographers, because stars are supposed to be round and not streaks. And one way to tackle this is to play with the real 3 pillars of photography, which is your exposure time, your aperture, which is the sort of opening in the camera that allows the light in. It refers to the opening of the lens's diaphragm through which the light passes, and the ISO, which is kind of sensitivity and signal gain on the camera. And to make the stars rounder, you could, for example, shorten the exposure, maybe go from 30 seconds to 20 instead, widen the aperture. It's a bit counterintuitive here, because the aperture is measured by the f number, and the smaller f number is the larger aperture. So you could maybe reduce that from f10 to f2.8, for example. And the ISO, which is the signal gain, you can increase that perhaps to 2000 or above. Another way to tackle this is to buy one of these little Equatorial Mounts. And they're really easy to use, really portable and very user-friendly. In fact, mine here runs off 4 AA batteries. And what it enables your camera to track the stars at the same speed that they're in the sky. So it basically cuts out the effects of the Earth's rotation. And so you should end up with pin-sharp stars with this, and you can increase the exposure time to 1 minute, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and they'll still be sharp because the camera's tracking them with this little mount that moves. Of course, you may have sharp stars when you're doing that, but the landscape, as you can see down the bottom there, will be blurred. And that's clearly because your camera is moving with the equatorial mount as it tracks the stars. So you've got great stars, but a pretty rubbish landscape. But there is a solution to this. You take a picture like the one on the left with your stars pin sharp with the equatorial mount working, and then using exactly the same exposure on settings on the camera, you take another picture with the mount turned off. Of course, this will give you streaking stars again because your mount's turned off, but the landscape will be sharp. And then with software, it's quite easy to cut out the sharp landscape from the one on the right and replace the blurred landscape on the left with it. So you end up with your sharp stars and your sharp landscape like this. So here's the Milky Way streaking across the sky with sharper stars and a sharp landscape with a combination of the two. In fact, I did this one here about 3 weeks ago down in Dorset on the south coast. And looking south at this time of year, you can see the best of the Milky Way with its galactic core, which is when you're looking into the core of the spiral galaxy. And that's where you get some of the most interesting stuff going on, and it looks great. With this picture, the bottom half, which was a 45-second exposure, I delayed it by 25 seconds before it took that exposure, which gave me time to run into the shot and stand there dead stationary for 45 seconds playing the role of man looking at stars. And then at the end of the photo, I kind of reverted back to my real life role, which was man looking at stars. So when it comes to planning these kind of shots, there are amazing apps available for your mobile phone that tell you what's going to be up in the sky at any given moment. In fact, the one on the left there, which is either Sky Guide or Sky Guide or Starwalk, they both are pretty similar. You can hold your mobile phone up to the sky and it tells you exactly what you're pointing it at and labels it. And the great thing about these as well is that you can fast forward in time. So that, for example, we see that one top right there, you can fast forward it and figure out when that galactic core is appearing in the optimum place. And you can see there it's sort of positioned toward the south. And the one I took in Dorset was, I think, about 2 o'clock in the morning. Stellarium is definitely worth a mention here. That's the one bottom right. You can just log on, it's free on the internet, and it gives you all that information. You can fast forward in time. It's brilliant playing around on it. So all the images so far have been ones taken without a telescope. And you don't need a telescope to do astrophotography, as you've seen. And there's a lot of fun to be had, and you could just stop there. I mean, there's loads of possibilities. But if you get a telescope, you are opening up a whole new world. And we bought this EvoStar 120 ED refractor. And as you can see on the left there, you can stick a camera on the end of it and take pictures of what it's looking at instead of using the eyepiece. And with this one, well, you can really get in there with the detail. It bumps everything up. You can see the kind of colors starting to appear, and there's a sharpness that you can't really get with one of those camera lenses. Even if I crop in here, you can see it's not too grainy. It's done a sort of reasonably good job. And you can really start to pick out the features. So there's the Apennine mountain range there, stretching up the moon. And if we're going even closer, okay, it's getting a bit grainy now, but there's the Apollo 15 landing site from 1972. You can see next to it, there's a little mountain there called Mons Hadley. And on Apollo 15 was, I think, the first Apollo mission to drive around on the moon. And they took quite a few pictures in front of Mons Hadley. There it is, the rover in front of Mons Hadley in 1972. That must have been fun. Another picture of the moon here. Well, the moon is over 3 billion years old. I think it's over 4 billion years old, to be precise. And it has very little geologic activity going on, like volcanoes or weathering from the wind or rain. So the craters on it last for billions of years. When I was talking about the journey going into outer space, well, the light from the moon takes 1.3 seconds to reach our eyes. A fact worth remembering, because it will give you some idea of how far we're going to move out to our next lot of objects. This isn't my telescope. This is the $4.7 billion Hubble Space Telescope, which over the last couple of weeks has run into a few problems actually with its software or hardware, I don't know. I think a bit more sophisticated than the, if we tried turning it off and on method of getting software to work. And the Hubble telescope takes the most beautiful pictures of these incredible objects in space, which I mentioned before, which are nebulas. So these are vast clouds of gas and dust. Sometimes they're created by stars reaching the end of their lives that expand to become red dwarfs and then essentially detonate, blasting gas and dust into outer space, into space. They can also form, because space isn't necessarily truly a vacuum, and there are particles out in space that attract to each other through their gravity and eventually sort of form clumps, which have greater gravity, and those clumps get bigger. And eventually this can end up in the formation of stars, which is why a lot of these are referred to as star nurseries. Here's another one. I mean, they're incredible objects, all different shapes, sizes, colors. I mean, who would have thought that there was this giant eye, the Helix Nebula, glaring down on us. So that's another Hubble picture. And then there's this one, which is the Pillars of Creation. It's possibly the most famous one. All subjective, of course, but I would say this is the most beautiful picture ever taken of anything in the natural world. It's 7,000 light years away. So remember, the moon, the light took 1.3 seconds to reach our eyes. Well, this light took 7,000 light years to reach our eyes. In other words, if you had a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light, it would take you 7,000 years to get there. But from our backyard in South London, and especially darker areas in the countryside, we can capture our own images of these nebulas. And I'll show you how we can go about this and capture them. So the big problem we have that Hubble doesn't have is that Hubble is 547 kilometers above Earth. So it doesn't have to take images through the atmosphere. And that is a huge advantage over us Earthlings. So here's a 5 minutes exposure of part of a nebula called the Cygnus Wall. And I've sort of blown it up a bit here. I've cropped it in a bit to sort of emphasize what the issue is. But you can see there's all those little dots on it, which is noise. Some of this noise is created by the electronics within the camera itself, but really the atmosphere creates a lot of this as well. And that's our problem. It's the enemy of astrophotographers. It's like a plague of rats crawling across your image, and we can't deal with it. So fortunately, there is a way of getting around this. There's basic software that is free and available on the internet. I use one called Deep Sky Stacker that's free, and you just download it and use it. And what you do is take a series of pictures of your nebula using exactly the same settings on the camera, with the same framing and everything. And you feed these into the software. So you just upload them into the software. And what this software does, the stacking software, is anything that's inconsistent in your images. So here we've got an image of a yacht, but let's say that nebula. And there's noise in there, as you can see, it's pretty dotty. Anything that's inconsistent in your images will be thrown out by the software. So one of the inconsistent things that's different in every is your noise. And so the noise gets thrown out. What this software does, it holds on to and enhances the signal that's in there that's common to all the pictures, which is your nebula. So you end up with this picture on the right, with the noise thrown out, with the noise thrown out, and the signal, which is your image, enhanced. And I'll just show you the effect of that. So here's our nasty picture with its rat scrolling across it, the noise. And if we stack, I think, 40 of these 5-minute images on top of each other with this software, we get this image. And as you can see, even though this is quite cropped in here, the noise is pretty much gone. And not only that, but what we really want to see, which is the billowing effects of this, these gases, and those kind of streaky lines top right. Those are what we want to see, and they've been enhanced. And the stars look much better here as well. So Yabu to you, Hubble. We've now found a way of cancelling out the fact that you're in, you don't have to shoot through the atmosphere. So the Earthlings versus Hubble, let's steal some of its techniques so that we can take it on and see if we can give it a run for its money. So here it is. We're going to have a look at this one, which is the Pillars of Creation. The Pillars of Creation image is made up of red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue will give you the full color image. And as you can see on the right there, there's a Venn diagram showing you how when they overlap, those colours, when they're mixed together, they give you different variations of colour. And really, this is the sort of central theory behind pretty much all of these images that I'm going to show you, because astrophotographers can use this technique to take a red, green, and blue image and combine them. I'll show you how Hubble did that with the pillars of creation. Well, the pillars of contains a number of gases, but them are hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3, and sulfur 2, 3 gases. And what Hubble did was take pictures of each of these gases. So this is the same object, obviously, but as you can see, all these images are slightly different from each other. There's oxygen, hydrogen in the middle, and sulfur, which is slightly different again on the right. So 3 gases, they're monochrome at the moment, but don't worry about that because you can color monochrome. And what Hubble does, it colors the oxygen blue, the hydrogen alpha green, and the sulfur red. And remember, our red, green, and blue give us our full color image. So how does it get these different images? Well, it uses filters. It uses a filter that only allows in a very narrow band of light from oxygen 3. And then another filter, to take its other picture here, with a filter that only allows in hydrogen alpha light. And then another one that only allows in sulfur. So these are very narrow band filters. They only allow in very narrow bands of light, so that it can pick out the oxygen and the hydrogen and the sulfur, and then color them blue, green, and red. And then combines, that's how the beautiful image of the pillars of creation is made. So we'll have a go at this, the Earthlings. Here's Zoe with our camera. This is slightly different from those DSLR cameras, although you can use DSLR cameras, and a lot of people do, and they get great results. But this is our monochrome CCD camera. They're just a bit more sensitive. And when you switch them on, they can cool down to 15 degrees. We use it at -15 below ambient temperature, which cuts out some of the noise. And remember, I was talking about those filters. Well, here's our 3 filters, our oxygen, hydrogen, and sulfur. You can just slide them into the telescope, into a little drawer, or you can put them on a filter wheel, which rotates, and you can select whichever one you want. So here's the telescope. You can see on the end there, that's our CCD mono camera, and the filter wheel is attached there. And of course, this is on a equatorial, so that it tracks the stars. You're not visually looking through these telescopes now. You're looking at the, they're basically, there's a USB cable attached to your laptop, and it looks complicated, but it's pretty simple, really. You're just seeing here a slightly splodgy version of what the camera can see. And what we're going to do, I'll show you this example with a nebula called NGC 7822, which is pretty much the most unromantic name that you could think of for a nebula, but actually it's quite a special little thing. So here's our hydrogen. Just like Hubble took the picture of the hydrogen, this is using our hydrogen alpha filter. Remember, we're going to need 3 of these pictures, our red, blue, and green, but each one is made up of a stack of images. So this is a stack of 75 5-minute images stacked together to get rid of the noise. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of detail in there, and that's kind of reasonably pleasing, that one. We're going to color that green. Hydrogen should be green according to Hubble. And here's the picture of the oxygen. There's not as much of that in there, but we're going to color that blue like Hubble does. And here's the picture of the sulfur that's in there, and we're going to color this red like Hubble did. But our blue, green, and red, 3 different gases, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur. And when we combine them together, here we are, got our full color image. So you can see the kind of palette, if you like, is sort of similar to what Hubble has used here. And the total exposure time of all the 5-minute frames would add up to 16 hours and 55 minutes. You don't have to go quite that crazy with it. It's good too if the images, if the nebulas are very faint. And here's that Cygnus wall one. I showed you the noise that was in the Cygnus wall. So this is up in the constellation of Cygnus. You can see there's a kind of star forming region in the bottom right there, which is that kind of yellowy area. And it looks like there's a hole in the gas with stars through the hole, but actually that's a cloud of very dark, thick material that is obscuring the light, and the stars are in front of it. And that was about 10 hours. That was 10 hours, 20 minutes altogether of exposures. But again, only just those three main plates of green, blue, and red, the different gases. And I mentioned you can do these with DSLR cameras. Those are clip filters there. And you just click them in, put one in, like you can see there's the hydrogen one on the clipped into that. And using that from our back garden, if you pointed at the North American Nebula, so called because obviously it's in the shape of North America. And that's what you see when you just see the hydrogen gas in it. Now, the brilliant thing about these narrow band filters is that you can use them in light polluted areas. They only allow in such a narrow band of light that they cut out all the extraneous, or a lot of the extraneous light, like street lights, for example. In fact, this one's from our back garden. This was just done in one evening, actually. It's not a mega 17-hour special. And this is just the hydrogen and oxygen. So the hydrogen is the red and the oxygen is cyan. I've colored them slightly different from what Hubble does in this instance. And this is a little bit more like what the natural colors are. And again, I mentioned before that, sometimes these are formed by stars detonating, which is a supernova. And this was formed, this is the Eastern Veil Nebula, formed by a star that was 20 times more massive than the sun, which exploded about 10,000 or 20,000 years ago. This is the Crescent Nebula, just using two of those filters again, the hydrogen alpha and oxygen. It's a kind of sort of brain-like bubble of hydrogen with a kind of furry sort of net of oxygen over it. This is 8 hours, 50 minutes. But again, this is from largely from our south back garden. There's all kinds of weird stuff up there. I mean, who would have thought a bubble in space, which is created by the stellar wind from a massive young central star. And if you're looking at taking a picture of your first nebula, I'd really recommend that you look up at Orion, which is, I think, my favorite constellation. It actually looks like what it's supposed to here, a guy with a club and a shield. And you can see there that there is a kind of sheath that his sword goes in. And in the middle of that is the Orion Nebula. And it's really bright. In fact, you can see it in a dark site with your naked eye. And this isn't, I think I probably need to spend more time or go back to this one. It's not a great picture of the Orion Nebula, but suffice to say, you know, within an hour and 45 minutes, which is not really that long to spend on a nebula, I got this image. It's rather rudely disappeared behind a tree in my garden. So I had to kind of give up after an hour and 45, but I hope to go back to it. But it just goes to show how, you know, you don't have to do your 18 hours of exposure. With this one, it's so bright, it's very forgiving. And Cassiopeia, well, she in Greek mythology was very unpopular with the gods because she was so vain, and also annoyed them because she tried to feed her daughter Andromeda to a sea monster, which was rather unkind. And as punishment, she got consigned to the heavens for eternity, tied to a chair. And here it is, the constellation of Cassiopeia. It's very easy to spot in the sky. It's a W shape. And in the middle of Cassiopeia is a nebula, which appears like a kind of ghostly figure. It's just near the central star. And it looks like this, this looks a bit kind of stunted up, but this is really how it actually appears if you just take a picture of the hydrogen alpha filter. And that star there, just above it, above the ghost, is that central star in Cassiopeia. So these nebulas, I was talking about our journey getting further away from the Earth. They are all within our galaxy. So that's our galaxy, looks something like that, bottom right. Didn't take that picture myself. And we are somewhere, I think, about sort of 3/4 of the way out from the center, sort of near the outside. And these nebulas are, well, some of them are a few thousand light years away, but the ghost of Cassiopeia, for example, is 550 light years away. But what if we want to go beyond our Milky Way? And there are all these incredible array of galaxies beyond our own. And instead of hundreds or thousands of light years away, these are millions of light years away. So again, you know, if you had a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light, well, it would take you millions of years, even at that speed, to get to one of these. And when you look at these, you're not necessarily seeing big clouds of gas and dust. There's gas and dust out there aplenty, but really you're kind of seeing the light from the stars. And the tech I've just shown you to take pictures of nebula isn't going to work with these, and we need to do something slightly different. So here's one of my pictures. This is the Pinwheel Galaxy, and that's 21 million light years away. It's Constellation of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. It was discovered in 1781. To give you an idea of the size, the diameter of it is about 170,000 light years across. And it's asymmetrical though. As you can see, there's a kind of warped spiral arm, which is due to the gravitational interaction between its companion galaxies. So the gravity from the other galaxies messes with it. There are tiny little bits of hydrogen in there, which are those little pink bits, but mostly your three hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen filters aren't really going to be right for taking a picture of this unless you change your technique. So let's take on the Hubble Space Telescope again. This is the Hubble's picture of M81, which is Bode's galaxy, 11.74 million light years away. It's a beautiful little thing. It's almost face on, and it's just wonderful. So what can we do as Earthlings to take on Hubble when it comes to galaxies? Well, remember we were using the red, green, and blue before. Well, to take pictures of galaxies, you just use a red, green, and blue filter basically to get the different bands of light. You use your blue filter, which only allows in the blue light, and the green for the green light, and the red for the red light. That one on the left there is a luminance filter, which allows in all three different light bands. And it gives you a kind of definition and contrast. Now, you can't do these from the city. They're not the right kind of filters. You have to go somewhere very dark. And again, my wonderful friend David allows me to use his garden for this. And yeah, that's snow on the ground there. It was -6 that night. But clear nights are at a premium in the UK, and you've got to do what you've got to do. So it's very cold. And here's the frost that night growing on the Earthling's car roof. It was so cold, like grass. It was too cold for little Earthling, who was tucked up in bed that night. So I mentioned that you see the image on a laptop, and this is essentially what I saw when I picked up Bode's galaxy M81, which is that rather unsightly little blotch in the bottom left of the field of view there. If you look top right, you can see there's a kind of longitudinal blotch, and that is M82, which is another galaxy sort of sideways on. So I thought, well, why not get both? Because both fit in the field of view, and we'll get two for the price of one. So this is the picture with the red filter. So this is just the red light from those two galaxies being picked up by the sensor on my camera. And the green filter, this is just the green light picked up by the green filter. And I'll just go back to the red. You can see they're kind of slightly different, not very different, but they're picking up different colors of light. And this is the blue filter for those two galaxies. This is that luminance one that gives you a bit of contrast. So we've got 4 plates now. Again, these are all stacked. So 78 5-minute frames made up this one. And then I mentioned that there was a bit of hydrogen in some galaxies. And in fact, I used a hydrogen filter on this one as well. And you can see it's picked out the little dots in those spiral arms on M81 and M82 top right. There's kind of jets of hydrogen that are kind of spurting out the middle of the galaxy. So then we've got our 4 plates, if you like, our 4 images: blue, green, red, luminance, and hydrogen alpha. And then we'll combine those together and they give us our final image. So here's Bode's galaxies, M81, M82. Total exposure time here is 16 hours, 55 minutes to create those 5 plates. And you can see top right, M82, you can see that red blast of hydrogen firing out of it, which is, again, this is caused by the gravity from M81 that's kind of messing around with it. There's a close-up of M81. And if you hold it up against Hubble, well, you can make up your own mind. I mean, I guess Hubble might have won. But, you know, given that Hubble on the right there is $4.7 million worth of hardware, I think we've done okay with that one. Here's M51, which is another galaxy. This is sort of quite a pretty little object and very popular with astrophotographers. And I think that within this galaxy is where the first exoplanet, which is a planet outside of our own solar system, is believed to have been found that orbits a star. So this is the first exoplanet orbiting a star in another galaxy, was discovered in M51. It's actually 2 galaxies, because the one on the right is believed to have passed through the one on the left, and has been sort of attracted back to it by its gravity. So they're doing a kind of merry dance in space. This is not my picture, but this is Miguel Claro, and this is the Andromeda Galaxy. And I'll just show you this, like the Orion Nebula. I'll just show you this because this is a great one to start with. It's very bright, and you can see it with your naked eye. Just to show you how big it is, actually, it's quite extraordinary, this. So if you look up at the sky and you see the moon there, if you could see the Andromeda Galaxy very, very clearly, it would look something like that in terms of scale. It's really about 6 times the width of the moon in the sky, which is quite extraordinary. It's our nearest galaxy, and one day it's believed that it will collide with our own, just like those ones in M51 collided. But by then we'll be long gone. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on processing your pictures, which is basically sort of pulling the best out of your images with software. But just suffice to say that the kind of basic software that you might have in iPhoto or Microsoft Photos is okay for the moon. But really, if you're sort of becoming serious about this, you need to be sort of using slightly more powerful software. So Adobe Photoshop is very good. There's astrophotography specific ones like PixInsight, which has a bit of a sharp learning curve, but is very effective. And there's others that are kind of easier to use that are astrophotography specific that I've kind of listed below there. And really just sort of learning how to use these on your pictures is quite an essential part of astrophotography. But a fun part, I mean, what could be more fun? And just to mention social media again, I can really recommend the astrophotography community on Instagram, who are very encouraging with each other. And it's not a nasty social media environment. It's one where people are trying to help each other out. And I've not really encountered any negativity on it. at all. And it's a great resource to find out what other people are doing. And very often people post the details of how they took pictures. So you can find out what their exposures were, what filters they use. It's a real good learning process. AstroBin is another good one, which is an online website where astrophotographers post their pictures, and as part of the rules of AstroBin have to post all the details of how the images were taken. In fact, on Instagram, on Wednesday of last week, just to show you the friendliness of the communities there, there was a composer called Johannes Winkler, who's based in Vienna, who writes for music and writes for film and television, and contacted me and said, "Hey, I like your picture. Can I write some music to go with it?" Well, yes, you can. And so I sent him a copy of the image, and I was playing very briefly some of the music that he composed with it, which is a kind of ambient soundtrack. So for that, he used I think I'm gonna have to move the picture on. He used an analog synthesizer and bass recorder flute and a giant crash cymbal. And just finally getting to the end now, just to say that, I think staying up very late and losing sleep and maybe staying all night under the stars is a really wonderful thing to do. But at the slightly more advanced level, there are ways around that. You may have work the next day, you may want to sleep, and actually there is now software and equipment that you can use to really automate the process, where you can get a telescope to automatically switch on at a given time of night. It can take a short exposure of the sky and learn where it's pointing, which is called plate scanning, and then slew around to your target and take however many pictures you want it to at sort of predetermined rates, enabling you to get sleep. But really, staying up with your telescope is a wonderful thing. But you can't always do that. And then just finally, I suppose quite a good question at this stage to finish with is, what is astrophotography? And is it technology? Well, yeah, for sure. As we've seen, it's the digital revolution that's enabled us to move things free, where amateur astrophotographers with basic domestic equipment in their backyard can capture and produce better images than the very best that were available from professional astronomers with observatories when I was a child, for example. Is it art? For sure. It's impossible to create an image of an object in space without making decisions about its aesthetic qualities and appearance, and the framing and the colors and the features you want to enhance, and what you want to hold back, for example. They all combine to create an artistic impression of what's out there, even if your approach is to be as true to the appearance of the real object as possible. Is it science? Yeah, for sure. I mean, many of these objects like something from a fantasy sci-fi movie, but they are, of course, for real, and they exist for a reason, and they're governed by the laws of physics. And it's taken the great minds of people like Einstein and Hawking to shed light on these laws that enable their existence. And for astrophotographers, it's impossible to capture these images without wondering what's going on out there and being drawn into the science behind it. And finally, is it philosophy? Well, for sure. I mean, if you want to know where we come from, how we fit into the vastness of the universe, and where ultimately humanity will end up, you could do a lot worse than looking up at the night sky. It won't provide all the answers, but it will reveal that the tiny dot that we call home is actually something very special, and most definitely worth looking after the best we can. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. That was really, really interesting talk. I'll put my video back on. I mean, as somebody who's been fascinated by astronomy and space and that since I was a little kid. It's amazing to see that, you know, the fact that I'm not likely to get a trip on any rockets anytime soon doesn't stop us from, you know, taking a view of the heavens, even from our South London back garden. So that was really, really inspiring. So we've got one or two questions in the chat. And I think the first question was one that Mark asked, Mark Berry, which was if you haven't got a friend who's got a nice back garden that's nice and dark in East Sussex, any suggestions on the nearest place to Streatham where you can get a good dark sky for a picture?
Yeah, so East Sussex is about an hour and 40 minutes, I think, drive from where I am. I also have a kind of intermediate location that I discovered before the kind hand of friendship was extended to me by David, which was down. So basically, I found a public footpath that goes through a field just near Edenbridge, and what I was doing, and I still sometimes use it now, which is just to kind of park up next to this field. It's a public footpath. I don't sleep or pitch my tent on there. I just set up the telescope there and use the path there, and it doesn't bother anyone, and it works perfectly okay. That's a Bortle 4 area, so the skies are still pretty dark down there.
Awesome. And out of interest, you mentioned you know, the Bortle rating. Again, it's not something I've come across before. Is there any apps or maps that help you you know where some good locations would be?
Yeah, there is this, no, I can't remember what it's called, but online there is a map of the UK where you can kind of hone in on your local area. And it's a kind of color graded map which shows you the Bortle rate, a different zone. And actually I use this to kind of find that place down in Edenbridge. It's a good technique to, if you're down in the south, to stay away from the M25, for example, and just stay away from towns, really.
Excellent. And I think as a lot of us will probably be staycationing this year, it's you know, potentially an opportunity to get you know, get our stargazing glasses out. Another question that's come in on the chat was from John, and he's asked, you know, what would be an ideal telescope to start with?
Well, I mean, I haven't used a broad range of telescopes, but one that seems to be easy to use and to cart around, to chuck in the back of your car, and is very mobile and is great for nebulas and galaxies, is a refractor telescope. You don't have to have a massively powerful one that's like meters and meters long. You can have quite a short one that gives you a very wide field of view, and you can do all kinds of things with that. Now, if you're taking pictures of planets, you'll have noticed that I didn't refer to planets at all in there, apart from the ones that got me excited when I was 11. And actually, that's because my refractor isn't ideal for that. You're looking at different kinds of telescopes and different techniques, and actually a different kind of camera, I think, from a CCD camera. You're looking for a CMOS camera, but you can also use DSLR type cameras as well. So it kind of depends what you want to take pictures from, but I think a refractor is a brilliant place to start because they're so easy to use and you can do so much with them.
Awesome. That's really helpful. Another quick question here from Graham is mentioned, sorry, it's excellent talk, Jeremy. You mentioned, sorry, you haven't mentioned calibration frames. What do you actually use?
Good question. I didn't want to get into quite that level of technical detail, but they are incredibly important. So basically, in a nutshell, once you've taken all your frames, say your 30 frames of your target, you want to iron out the imperfections that appear as a result of either the lens you're using or hot pixels, little imperfections in your sensor. And to do this, what I do is take dark frames, which you do by putting a cap over the lens of the camera and taking a set of exposures exactly the same duration, your main frames. And I also do flat frames which is another set of frames that you take with a light box. I take with a light box over the end of the telescope. We could spend an hour talking about it, so I probably shouldn't say more, but in short, dark frames and flat frames.
Awesome.
When you just feed those into the stacking equipment with your normal frames, and it uses them and reads them and irons out some of the imperfections in your pictures.
Excellent, that's great. And just on the Bortle scales, we've had a couple of tips from Dave and Wendy. Clear Sky Outside, which is a website as well, and John has also recommended lightpollutionmap.info. So
great. Yeah. So I use Clear Outside a lot, and windy.com as well. I kind of combine those two. Yeah. They still get it horribly wrong between them. But it's as reliable a source as anywhere else, I think. Awesome.
And this is a question from me. I was curious, when you're doing the RGB frames or exposures, how many days apart? Because obviously some of those exposures were like, several hours long, or probably more than a nighttime long. So if you're doing 3 exposures across 3 nights, does it has to be 3 nights the same consecutively, or could you, how long can you get away with in case there's bad weather or something like that?
Yeah, I love that question. So basically, because these objects are such an unfathomably large distance away, they don't really change over multiple nights. I mean, they might change over a million years, and just occasionally something will change within a relatively short space of time. But if you're taking pictures of any of these objects that I've shown tonight, the nebulas and the galaxies, they're exactly the same. Some people begin taking their frames, they take one set one year and they'll take another set the next year and add to them. So you can leave it sort of nights and nights apart, which is a good job given that we have so much cloud cover in the UK. But also I know of people where somebody, say in Canada, has taken one set of images and someone in Japan has taken another set, and they've combined them to create one image. And they may be thousands of kilometers apart. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, given that the object that they're taking pictures of is millions of light years away, it's not really any distance at all.
Interesting. That's really, again, I hadn't thought of that. Great way, again, as you say, with such a collaborative community for people to pool their resources. Awesome. Other thing I noticed was, you spoke about the range of cameras from your iPhone, which kind of, as you say, was your gateway drug, right up to your CCD camera. I also noticed kind of in the middle there you have a Canon EOS RA. What difference do you see going from something like a DSLR or mirrorless that's for astrophotography versus a dedicated CCD type device?
Well, I mean, first of all, you can take great pictures with either, but in short, your sensor on a color camera is divided between little pixels or photo, I think they're called photo zones, I can't remember what they're called, but they pick up red, some pick up green, and some pick up blue. And so it's called the Bayes matrix. And so if you're taking pictures of something that has red light, you only a fraction of your sensor is actually picking up those red light photons. So you're not working your sensor 100%. And I think there's slightly more green parts of the sensor than there are blue and red. But even then, with a green color, your entire sensor isn't working. You're just the photo sites that are sensitive to green, they're picking up the photons from the green light. So if you use a monochrome sensor like you have in the CCD cameras, well, those photo sites don't care what color the light is, they'll pick it up anyway. And so that's a tremendous advantage, because your entire range of photo sites, your entire sensor is working hard to collect the light. And so it's more sensitive, and you'll get slightly better results with it.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And I hate to say it, for us photographers, we get very excited about megapixel counts and all that kind of stuff, but as you rightly said, if you're only using 1/3 of the pixels on the sensor, it kind of, it makes a lot of sense. Oh, interesting. Great. Oh, we've had another question, I think, from Graham. Is it possible to use a specialist called one-shot color camera, better than a DSLR and almost as good as mono?
Mark?
Yeah.
It's not a question.
Oh, that was a statement. You're right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for butting in there. But we're happy for anybody who's online. If they wanted to unmute and ask a question directly, feel free. We've still got a few minutes left.
Good evening. Thanks, Jeremy. Excellent chat.
Thank you.
I hope you'll come to MCAS and represent it next year.
Thank you.
No, just to say, I mean, you've gone from an iPhone or a smartphone through a DSLR, and then you've gone what I would say is the whole hog into a monochrome camera with a filter wheel and all sorts of different filters. And I just wanted to flag up that picking on the question that the comment Mark was making, you can also buy one-shot color cameras. So in other words, it's a bit like a DSLR chip. The one I have is in fact a Nikon D7100 chip, but they are cooled. So exactly the same idea. You reduce all the thermal noise and reduce the impact that has, but you then don't necessarily need to use filters. You can do, but you don't use narrowband filters and filter wheels for the very reason Jeremy said, and that is that you're losing quite a lot of sensitivity because these cameras have a biomatrix. But they are, if you like, a stepping stone between a DSLR and the sort of rig that Jeremy has. And given, as you've also mentioned, the vagaries of the weather and the time problems, it does reduce the processing side a bit because you're only producing effectively stacking single images rather than having to get lots of different images from different filters and then combining them. And they are technology wise now, the CMOS sensors are getting up there pretty much with what CCDs were. They're certainly a lot cheaper to produce, and they produce excellent results. So it's not a question of just going from a DSLR and then having to leap into the sophistication that Jeremy has. And I have to say, I do admire his dedication. Being out in -6 down in David Rees's back garden is not for the faint-hearted, I can assure you. So, but anyway, I just wanted to make that point in case people were put off thinking that they couldn't actually, you know, get further than a DSLR without spending humongous amounts of money.
Yeah, it's a really great point, well made, and thank you for that. And those cameras are very, you know, they're very good now, those CMOS cameras, and people are getting really amazing results. I mean, as I said at the beginning, you know, there are lots of different ways of gathering these images, and we could sort of spend all night covering different techniques. And you know, I suppose the key thing is to go out there and have fun with the equipment that's available to you and that you can afford, and get the most out of it, because it, you know, it can be literally a kind of life-changing experience.
Definitely. I've got another quick question, but I didn't know, did anybody else want to jump in before I ask my question?
I was just going to ask, is there any events that sort of, because obviously you've got such a large community around the world, are there any sort of astro events that sort of suddenly pop up where people go, like, they've noticed something in the sky, so everyone sort of focuses their attention there?
There are. I mean, there's I mean, one that was that was kind of spoken about quite a lot just recently was, if you remember that constellation of Orion that I showed you. Well, as you look at Orion, the star that is his left shoulder, as you look at him, is a star called Betelgeuse. I think there's different ways of pronouncing it, and I possibly got it wrong, but Betelgeuse. And that it's a huge star that recently, even, you know, within quite a short space of time, people have noticed that it's been changing in intensity and slight variations in color as well, I believe. And there's been a lot of theories put forward as to what's going on there, including some people suggested initially that it was about to become a supernova and detonate, which is something I was talking about earlier. But it may also be, and I think this is more recently mooted theories, is that some interstellar dust or gas is passing in front of it, affecting its brightness. I don't know what the answer to it is to it, and probably Graham or David are much better informed about it than I am. But you know, there's an example of something that everybody notices, even from a light polluted city that's kind of changing over a very relative, you know, very short space of time.
Fascinating. My question, so on a similar note, really, is, you know, now what's your next sort of astronomical you know, thing you're going to point your camera at? What's next? Is summer a good or a bad time for astrophotography, or are you waiting again for winter?
Well, you know, I think it's worth noting that this time of year is quite poor for astrophotography. I mean, apart from all the clouds, but that could happen at any time of year. There is a kind of gauge of what they call astronomical darkness, I think it's called. And in June, up until the sort of round about now, I suppose, there's no astronomical darkness at all in the skies. That doesn't mean to say that you can't see amazing stuff up there, or even doesn't mean you can't do astrophotography, but you won't see the real true dark skies that you see, say, in the autumn and winter. By August, things really start to improve quite rapidly. So I'm not going to wait that long, but actually I may have to wait a long time yet, because these clouds don't seem to be disappearing. And you know, I'm not absolutely sure what I'm going to do next. Possibly the Western Veil Nebula, which is on the other side of that one I showed you earlier, which is the Eastern Veil Nebula, which is part of a giant supernova that's sort of got these beautiful kind of intertwined ribbons of light.
Awesome. Cool. And I guess, you know, now we've got things like space tourism. We've got, you know, Jeff Bezos and, you know, Richard Branson, you know, battling it out to see who's going to be the first billionaire in space. If you could go to space, do you think, is there anything that you want to image that you can't image from Earth? Well, did a pretty good job so far.
probably the Earth, I would have thought, quite a good starting point. I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that we can really look forward to is that, you know, actually the Hubble Space Telescope is about 30. As I mentioned, it's running into kind of software issues, but there's a telescope that's launching end of October, possibly, or was it end of September, October time. And that is state of the art. It's cost billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's years and years and years overdue. And it's been riddled with issues, but it's finally gonna, touch wood, go up at the end of this year. And the James Webb Telescope will send back images that I think will be astonishing, because the technology that it will use is just, you know, so much more advanced than anything we've ever seen. And I suppose one way of thinking about it, which is quite mind-boggling, is that you know, when we're looking at these objects, you're kind of looking back in time, if you like. If a galaxy is 21 million years away, you're looking back and seeing something 21 million years ago. So if you can look back in time by looking out in space, then the James Webb Telescope, that can look a really, really long time back, in unfathomably large amount of time back into space, almost to the kind of early formations of the galaxies. And you know, that's just a kind of mind-boggling concept. And some of just the pictures that it will be able to take will be astonishing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was last week in the news, they were speaking about how, you know, astrophysicists have kind of worked out roughly how long after the Big Bang the first stars, you know, ignited. I think it was something like between 350 and 400 million years after the Big Bang. and how the stars would have been totally different from the stars we know now. And it would be amazing to think if they can image, some of those early or those first generation stars, just to kind of see if the artist renditions are anything like, what they really were like. But it's again, as you rightly say, it does, certainly fill me with awe just thinking about these things.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
So I think Jeremy has definitely deserved another round of applause, and more importantly, a cup of tea. But if anybody has any last questions before we let him, like I say, go off for a very well-deserved refreshment, I'll kind of give it one last round. Any last questions, or are we all good? I think we're good. So firstly, thank you very much, Jeremy, for giving your time so freely and sharing, your passion and the stunning images you've created. Again, you've certainly opened my eyes, because as a born and bred Londoner, I never thought I'd, get a chance to create images or capture images rather, to the quality that you have. Yeah, I'm looking at various websites, and I mean various websites as in astrophotography websites that I probably shouldn't do, just because I'm kind of getting the bug now. So Anne-Marie might
Thank you, Mark.
tell me off about that, but thanks again, Jeremy. Really enjoyed your presentation, your enthusiasm, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Done, Jeremy.
Awesome. Well, good night, folks. Thank you all for joining, and keep an eye on the Iron Streatham website for our next awesome event.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks for the invite. Stay safe, everyone.
You too. Take care now.
Thanks everybody for joining. Cheers now. Bye.
Bye.